I often tell you what I think on social media, and pretty much everything that I think has arisen from what I hope to think is good, up-to-date, impartial, quantified and qualified independent research. But I want to tell you what I'm feeling. I'm feeling really depressed. I'm feeling more depressed than I have done for some considerable time. I think it's a cumulative thing. I've had some personal issues which have enhanced that trajectory. But I think that the whole thing came to a head today when I saw the pictures of Geronimo being led away to slaughter. I found those images extremely distressing because I like animals, because I like life, because I respect life, because I respect science, and I like to believe in a meritocracy and a democracy, but the latter two were clearly absent. Because when I saw those images of that terrified animal being separated from its small herd and dragged across a field and tied inappropriately in a van in extraordinary distress to be led away to slaughter, I thought to myself, there can't be a person with any real depth of compassion for other animal life in this country who would condone that behaviour. Now we know that every day animals are taken to slaughter. But the farmers that I know show respect for those animals, and they don't like some of the practices, and they don't like some of the impositions that they have to face when the animals that they've cared for and nurtured are taken away. And they wouldn't have condoned that either. I can tell you that as a fact. I think that the subsequent revelation that Defra have failed to allow an independent vet to be present at the post-mortem is again extremely worrying, because it portrays an extraordinary degree of arrogance. What it indicates to me is that these people are beyond accountability. They don't have to ask for our accountability, and nor do they expect to have to satisfy it at any point. They are frankly just riding roughshod over the science, over public opinion, and over their own interests. And that's desperately, desperately sad. Desperately. Obviously, at this point, as a person who's got two companion animals, I can't see them at the moment, my dogs, Itchy and Scratchy, and Sid and Nancy, my current poodles. To have an animal taken away as Helen MacDonald has had today, again, is something that I can't imagine. I can't imagine a team of people accompanied with police officers arriving at my home tomorrow and dragging Sid and Nancy out by their leads on collars, tying them in a van and taking them away to be killed. It goes against, it's inconceivable. But that's what's happened today for Helen MacDonald. And she has been put through a tremendous amount of mental stress over the past months as she sought to find justice in our democracy, to have Geronimo properly tested so that we can all better understand the inadequacies of the BTB crisis in the UK. And let's not pretend that there's any ambiguity here. There is a BTB crisis in the UK, and it's affecting more than Helen and Geronimo. It's affected hundreds of thousands of farmers and hundreds of thousands of animals for years, and that's because Defra and other bodies have wholeheartedly failed to deal with this in an adequate way. There are not proper tests available. And frankly, what we should have had, and we would have had long ago if it weren't for trade embargoes, is a vaccine to give cattle and other animals so this would never need to happen. And in the subsequent period, we've seen over 100,000 badgers needlessly slaughtered, the science says so, expensively slaughtered. The taxpayer, that's you and me, have paid the bill, and inhumanely slaughtered because free shooting, as we know from Defra and Naturals, England's own revelations, has told us that that process hasn't been humane. What happened with Geronimo was that these people were put on the spot and they found themselves between a rock and a hard place. And rather than accept the hard place, today they have hammered the rock. A terrible, terrible mistake. A PR disaster the likes of which no one could have orchestrated. A lot of people seem to want to blame George Eustace. I'm not quick to reach for that. George is a man who's come into a position for a short period of time. He's probably grappling to deal with this and many other issues. The problem we have here is the long-standing lobbying of outside bodies and their infiltration and influence within Defra to perpetuate these sorts of practices. That's what we have to realise. I'm very surprised that the broader farming community didn't see this as an opportunity to finally find the courage to raise questions about the efficacy of the testing process for BTB. But they chose not to go down that route. Despite the fact that the harm that BTB does to the farming fraternity is very significant, not just economic. And don't be cynical and think that the farmers are happy to lead their herds to slaughter so that they can cash in on the subsidies. Many of the herds that have been slaughtered have been animals that have been nurtured over years by those farmers and their parents and their grandparents. And our sympathies are always with those farmers and their difficulties. But I don't think they've been well served by their so-called leaders on this occasion. Because in the very near future, in the wake of Brexit, there will be a monumental reappraisal of the farm subsidy system. And it's very important that we remain friendly with our British farmers. They need our support. Many of them are leading very difficult lives because, once again, they've not been properly supported by their leaders and by you and I, who rush to the supermarkets to buy cheap food that don't put the food in their pocket. So, I'm very depressed, I'm very angry. What am I going to do about it? Well, I'm not going to blame George Eustace. I've got no direct evidence to suggest that he is in any way personally responsible for this. As I say, it's a long-term, long-running issue. I'm going to continue to campaign for science-based decision-making. I'm going to continue to campaign as a UK taxpayer for those who I elect and I pay, Defra, to do the right thing rather than the wrong thing, which they've demonstrated so appallingly today. And I'm going to continue to support good British farming practices at a difficult time for this community of people. Not everyone can see an opportunity for reform. Not everyone wants to embrace reform or transition at the same speed. So we must exercise tolerance. We've got to give people a chance to change their minds, sometimes quickly and sometimes more slowly. But what we have to do is constantly encourage them to move in the right direction. And we all have a role to play there when it comes to the way that we treat the animals that we keep in captivity in the UK. But what we've seen today is an appalling public relations disaster. We've seen the appalling cruelty wrought upon an animal. We've seen a total lack of accountability, an extraordinary amount of arrogance, and therefore an angry reaction to the apparent disempowerment of you and I as taxpayers to these people whose wages we pay, to act on our behalf, in our best interest, and who clearly today were not acting in our best interests, or that of the people that they purport to need to look after. And lastly, we have to be clear that whilst our spleens are being vented against Defra, there will be many employees within Defra who don't agree with what happened today and who've had to go home when their workday ended. And I can only imagine that they were demoralised and distraught and troubled by their position, because they, like so many other people within these large institutions, often misled from the top down, do everything they can to make things right. So let's not throw all of our spears at all of Defra, all of our spears at the UK farming fraternity, who are really struggling and deserve far more support than we give them. But we do have to question at this point what we're getting for our democracy, so-called democracy. Because today, I and many other people were horrified by the manifestation of the lack of that. And that's why I'm depressed. Just thought I'd tell you. Tomorrow's another day. Got to get up, keep going, press for reform, and remember to be kind. Just be kind in the way that we try to lead progress.